Hello and welcome back. In this lecture, we will mainly be looking at the game Age of Mythology and how well it simulates and represents the ancient world and ancient Greek mythology. Before we discuss that though, we first need to finish talking about the Greek tragedy, the Bacchae. Now, if you haven't yet, you should read our two primary sources for this week by Homer and Ovid before going forward with this lecture. The Bacchae was written by the Athenian playwright Euripides. Euripides probably composed around 92 different plays during his lifetime, and we still have 18 or 19 that survive today, which is actually an incredibly high number. This fact reflects just how popular Euripides was both in antiquity as well as in the medieval era compared to other famous playwrights such as Aeschylus and Sophocles. One of the things that marks many of Euripides' plays is his sympathy towards all victims of society, including women. While certainly not a feminist in modern standards, Euripides' convictions did cause some friction between him and some of the more conservative citizens in Athens. In order to fully understand and appreciate the Bacchae, it is important that you are aware of several myths that serve as the backdrop to the play. The first is the myth of Cadmus. As you read, Cadmus was the first real Greek hero, allegedly living around 2000 BC. When he failed to find his sister Europa, who had been abducted by Zeus and taken to Crete, he ultimately wandered until he found the city of Thebes and married the beautiful woman Harmonia. Upon slaying a dragon who was guarding this land, Cadmus sewed the dragon's teeth into the ground and outgrew the first line of leading Theban citizens. Cadmus and Harmonia went on to have 4 daughters, Agave, Autonoe, Ino, and Semele. Despite founding Thebes, Cadmus was plagued by terrible misfortunes, both because the dragon he killed had been sacred to Ares, but also because Harmonia had been gifted a necklace by the god Hephaestus that was cursed with bad luck. Though Cadmus is still alive, it is his grandson Pentheus, the son of Agave, who is the king of Thebes when the Bacchae takes place. The second myth is that of Dionysus and Semele. Semele, one of the daughters of Cadmus, became a priestess of Zeus. Before too long, however, she became Zeus's lover. When Hera found out, she disguised herself and befriended Semele. Baiting Semele, Hera told her that if Zeus really loved her, he would show her his true divine form. So the next time Semele and Zeus were together, he promised her anything she asked. When Semele asked to see Zeus's true form, the king of the gods reluctantly obliged, but the sight instantly killed her. Despite her death, Zeus managed to save her unborn child by stitching it into his thigh. This child would become Dionysus, the god of wine and one of the main figures in the play. Third is the myth of Tiresias. Appearing in many Greek tragedies, Tiresias is the ever-ignored voice of reason. Despite being blind, Tiresias had been given the gift of prophetic sight by the gods. There are 2 main versions of how he gained this power. In one account, he saw Athena naked, and so she immediately blinded him. Later regretting her actions, though, Athena gave him the gift of prophetic sight to make up for the loss. In the second myth account, Tiresias had been turned into a woman by Hera for 7 years. Years later, Zeus and Hera were having an argument about who enjoyed sex more, men or women. Since Tiresias had experienced both, he seemed like a perfect judge. When he answered them that women found more pleasure during sex, Hera, unhappy with the answer, struck him blind. Unable to reverse it, Zeus instead gave him the gift of prophetic sight and extended his lifespan 7-fold. In addition to serving as the advisor of Pentheus in the Bacchae, Tiresias helped many other heroes and kings including Oedipus, Creon, Cadmus, and Odysseus. Finally, the myth of Actaeon. Actaeon, the son of Autonoe, the daughter of Cadmus, was a great Boeotian hero who had been trained by the centaur Chiron. When he was out hunting with his friends one day, however, he happened to find Artemis and her virgin followers bathing in a spring. As punishment for his transgression, Artemis transformed Actaeon into a stag. Before long, Actaeon's friends and his hunting dogs, unaware of his transformation, fell upon him and tore him to shreds. With this background in mind, we can now move forward to the play itself. Dionysus, the god of wine, ecstasy, and fertility, returns home to his birthplace in Thebes after being in Thrace so that he can clear his mother's name and punish Thebes as its king Pentheus refused to let the Thebans worship Dionysus. As we just discussed, his mother Semele, a Theban princess and the daughter of Cadmus, had an affair with Zeus and became pregnant. Hera tricked Semele into asking Zeus to reveal himself, which ultimately killed her. Zeus, however, saved the child Dionysus by stitching him into his thigh. Back at Thebes, however, Semele's sisters claimed that Semele had been struck by lightning because she had lied about her affair with Zeus, angering the king of the gods and therefore making Dionysus a bastard child from some scandalous affair. Dionysus returns to Thebes disguised as a stranger, accompanied by his band of followers. Upon arriving, he drives Semele's sisters mad along with the other women of Thebes, and they flee to Mount Kithaeron to perform his sacred rites. King Pentheus, ever the defender of social order, is aghast at the women's behavior and has Dionysus arrested. When he tries to torture him, however, he finds that nothing can harm the disguised god. Dionysus later tries to convince Pentheus to allow his worship and stop his rigid control of the city, but the proud king refuses to listen despite warnings from his wise advisor Tiresias. A messenger brings word to Pentheus that the women in the forest around the mountain are feasting on wine and honey and suckling wild animals as they dance and sing. Upon seeing the messenger, however, the women chase after him and almost kill him. Instead, they tear apart a herd of nearby cattle limb for limb. The king is intrigued by the messenger's story of the female worshippers of Dionysus, known as Maenads, including his own mother, Agave. Seeing this, Dionysus offers to show him these women up close. Pentheus agrees, wishing to see the sacred Bacchic rituals of Dionysus for himself, as men were forbidden from participating. Following Dionysus's orders, Pentheus puts on a wig and a dress, and they set off to find the Maenads. Once close, the king climbs a tree in order to better see the women, but as soon as he does, they spot him. On Dionysus's order, the Maenads, led by Agave, Pentheus's mother, pull down the king and rip him limb from limb. Agave later brings back Pentheus's head to the palace, believing she has killed a lion. Cadmus reveals to her the reality of the situation, and she realizes that she has killed her son. Upon returning to the palace as well, Dionysus banishes Agave from Thebes and turns Cadmus and his wife Harmonia into snakes. Before we move on to the didactic purpose that's central to all of these Athenian plays, I first want to draw your attention to a really excellent bit of irony at work in the Bacchae. In line 228, Pentheus says, "Those who run at large shall be hunted down out of the mountains like the animals they are. Yes, my own mother Agave, and Ino, and Autonoe, the mother of Actaeon. In no time at all I shall have them trapped in iron nets and stop this obscene disorder." Pentheus's reference to Actaeon here is seeped with irony. The reality is that Pentheus's own story is playing out in the exact same way that Actaeon's does. Actaeon goes into the forest as the hunter and eventually becomes the hunted. The exact same thing happens here with Pentheus. He goes into the forest as the hunter, and he ultimately becomes the hunted. Just as Actaeon's own hunting dogs tear him apart and kill him, so too does Pentheus's own family, led by his mother, tear him apart and kill him. One of the main pieces behind the plot of this play are the issues of legitimacy. The very purpose why Dionysus actually returns to Thebes is really to punish those family members who had questioned his own legitimacy. He says, "For I have come to refute that slander spoken by my mother's sisters, those who least had right to slander her. They said that Dionysus was no son of Zeus, but Semele had slept beside a man in love and foisted off her shame on Zeus, a fraud." And later Pentheus, "And this is the man who claims that Dionysus is a god, and was sown into the thigh of Zeus, when, in point of fact, that same blast of lightning consumed him and his mother both, for her lie that she had lain with Zeus in love." The greatest insult then to Dionysus is the fact that Pentheus and the Thebans have tried to undermine his divinity by questioning his legitimacy of who his father was. This plays into a very serious contemporary issue that was going on with Athens at the time. In 451 BCE, there was a law passed known as Pericles' citizenship law. And what this did was it made it so that in order to become an Athenian citizen, both your father and your mother had to themselves be Athenian citizens. Since both parents needed this status, it became extremely important to the point of obsession to be able to prove your parentage and therefore your legitimacy as an Athenian citizen. As a democracy, those who were Athenian citizens had enormous amounts of rights. Those who were not had very few rights. Another important issue within the play is the struggle between reason and piety. Despite the fact that as the leader of Thebes, Pentheus does need to keep civil order, he does this so rigidly that he leaves no room for piety. This message is repeatedly hammered throughout the play. Tiresias says, "The man whose glibness flows from his conceit of speech declares the thing he is, a worthless and stupid citizen." Here Tiresias is talking about Pentheus. He's saying that due to his inflexibility, Pentheus is actually being a bad citizen. We have to remember that the messages offered in these plays were towards Athenian citizens on how to be better citizens. Later, Cadmus says, "I am a man, nothing more. I do not scoff at the gods." Similarly, Tiresias again, "We do not trifle with divinity. No, we are the heirs of customs and traditions hallowed by age and handed down to us by our fathers. No quibbling logic can topple them, whatever subtleties this clever age invents." Again, this refers back to contemporary Athens. Given the nature of the Athenian democracy, there was a serious concern amongst the Athenians that the demos could be misled by clever speakers. Here Tiresias, and therefore Euripides, reinforces the fact that even the most clever speaker cannot undercut tradition and piety. Later, Dionysus, a man, and nothing more, yet he presumed to wage war with a god," referring to Pentheus. The chorus then, "To accept the gods, to act as a mortal, this is a life free from pain." And finally, humility, a sense of reverence before the sons of heaven, of all the prizes that a mortal man might win, these I say are the wisest, these are best. Again, the focus of all this piety and humility in Athens is to remind everyone that no single individual can ever rise above the gods or above the state. Another important theme present in the Bacchae is the place of women. The chorus says, "To the mountains, where the throng of women waits, driven from shuttle and loom, possessed by Dionysus." Pentheus, "When once you see the glint of wine shining at the feasts of women, then you may be sure the festival is rotten." Pentheus, "The man who infects our women with this new disease and pollutes their beds, he shall die as he deserves, by being stoned to death." Pentheus again, "Affairs are out of hand if we tamely endure such conduct in our women." And later the messenger, "But she was foaming at the mouth, and her crazed eyes rolled with frenzy. She was mad, stark mad, possessed by Bacchus." And later when Agave returns to the palace, "I have left my shuttle at the loom. I raised my sight to higher things, to hunt animals with my bare hands. You see?" And earlier Pentheus, "I happen to be away, out of this land, but I've heard some strange mischief in town, stories of our women leaving home to frisk in mock ecstasies among the thickets on the mountain." In thinking about women in ancient Athens, we have to remember two things. First, that women were extremely marginalized. Women would not have been at the theater watching this play, they would have been at home where they were pretty much ostracized from society. And in this play, just like we see with a lot of other Greek tragedies as well as comedies, there's an inherent fear amongst male Athenians of what will happen if women leave their place from the home. If women are given more rights, if women are given power, this will be the downfall of the city. The case in point here with Agave, when she does leave her shuttle at the loom and she does try and go to higher things, what ends up happening? She is found holding the head of her own son and the king of Thebes in her hands, having torn his head from his body. So on the one hand, we have this deep-rooted social fear of the unrestrained chaos that women might sow if they're given any sort of power. Euripides certainly complicates this idea, though, as after all, the tragic situation that the Thebans now find themselves is ultimately due to Pentheus' rigid rulership. It's these sort of universal issues, though, that are at play and at stake with all of the plays that go through Athens. At its core, myth always remains didactic in its purpose. We will now turn to Ensemble's Age of Mythology, a real-time strategy game that initially came out in 2002, although it has been remastered on Steam as of 2014. As we look through this game, you should be considering how well Age of Mythology represents the notions of Greek mythology, both in accuracy as well as in authenticity. To do this, we will look closely at all four main aspects of this game as we discussed during the first week of lecture: story, game space, gameplay, and content detail. Beginning with the game's storyline, we will focus on the single-player campaign. Let's take a look at the game's opening trailer. While it may not be initially apparent, the game's trailer actually does a good job cutting to the heart of what the plot of the single-player campaign entails. The Atlantean hero Arkantos, aided by the goddess Athena, fights in a larger war amongst the gods, helping Zeus, the king of the Olympian gods, to ultimately defeat his father, Kronos, the king of the Titans. The progression of the campaign makes this clear over 32 levels. Arkantos is the leading general in the mythic city of Atlantis. All of his motivations stem from his great love of his city and his son Castor. The campaign begins with pirates attacking Atlantis and stealing the trident from the statue of Poseidon in the Atlantean harbor. Yet for Arkantos, what starts as just another fight against pirates soon leads him across the Mediterranean, to the famous war at Troy, to the gloom of the underworld, and even to the sands of Egypt and the frigid forests of Scandinavia.
That looked like Theris. It has been a long time since you sent him to the underworld, Arkantos. Fighting old battles again?
Yes. Old enemies. I still see them here.
You have won more battles for Atlantis than can be counted, faced opponents no other man dared fight.
That was long ago. Today, Atlantis' enemies live only in my dreams. I face feeble pirates now.
Is that what you believe, Atlantean? Atlantis still has enemies, and you are still the one who will face them.
Any who threaten my home or my family will soon have a place in my dreams.
These are enemies unlike the others, Arkantos. Do not let your guard down. Dark times are coming.
After arriving at Troy during the 10th year of the war, presumably running parallel with much of the events of Homer's Iliad, Arkantos helps the Greek general Agamemnon and a handful of Greek heroes, including Ajax and Odysseus, to launch various assaults against the Trojans and the city walls. Ultimately, it's Arkantos' idea to feign retreat and leave a wooden horse behind to trick the Trojans and capture the city, the famous Trojan horse. On his way home from Troy, Arkantos stops in Greece to get his ships repaired, where he is forced to liberate the local population from bandits who have struck while the Greek armies were away at Troy.
This does not look good. What happened?
Run! More bandits! Bandits!
No, you old fool. We are your own army. We returned from Troy.
Praise Zeus! The soldiers have returned.
Yes. Now what happened here?
After the army sailed for Troy, bandits attacked the city. They took our men hostage. Chiron, too.
Who is Chiron?
He does the bidding of the gods.
Now joined by Ajax as well as the wise centaur Chiron, Arkantos fights his way to the nearby mines in order to liberate the captured locals. It is here that he meets the person behind these attacks, the mighty Cyclops Gargarensis.
I will warn you. This once.
Enough babbling, coward! Come face me! Atlantis does not fear the likes of you.
It should. I have warned you. Continue to pursue me, and I will spare neither you, nor your city, nor your son.
It is at this point that we finally understand the larger plot of the story. The Cyclops, Gargarensis, is attempting to break open one of the doors to Tartarus, the deepest prisons of the underworld. It is later in the campaign that Arkantos discovers why. Upset that his status is beneath Zeus's, Poseidon wishes to free Kronos, the titan who fathered both Zeus and Poseidon, from Tartarus, and overthrow Zeus and the Olympian gods. As one of Poseidon's sons and promised immortality, Gargarensis then is just a pawn in this larger conflict amongst the gods.
The gate. What do you think is behind it?
I don't know, but if our Cyclops friend wants to open it, I think we want it to stay closed. We've got to destroy that ram. Call for reinforcements at once!
Luckily for Arkantos, the heroes manage to destroy the ram before Gargarensis can free Kronos. This, however, was not the only door to Tartarus. Arkantos must prevent Gargarensis from opening doors in Egypt and in the north as well. Ultimately, by reassembling the pieces of the god Osiris in Egypt with the help of the princess Amun-Ra, and by using the power of the Hammer of Thor, aided by the dwarves Brock and Eitri, Arkantos is able to prevent Gargarensis from opening either the Egyptian or the Norse gates. Believing that Gargarensis has finally been killed and Poseidon's plot foiled, Arkantos finally returns to Atlantis, only to find the city on the verge of complete destruction.
How close are we?
Very. We'll make port before the sun sets. Bring out the head of Gargarensis. Lash it to the bow.
Yes, sir.
What trick is this? That is Kemsid's head.
Arkantos! Atlantis.
There is actually a fourth and final gate to Tartarus beneath the streets of Atlantis, and Gargarensis is moments away from opening it and releasing Kronos upon the world. Empowered by Zeus, Arkantos leads a final attack onto Atlantis and against Gargarensis, ultimately defeating him and preventing Kronos' release. While the Atlantean people have been rescued by Ajax and Amun-Ra, the city itself was destroyed, sinking far beneath the ocean. While Arkantos was killed as well in the devastation, he is ultimately returned to life as a god for his services.
Arkantos, awaken.
Moving next on to game space. As we explained last week, game space is also an important aspect to any video game. The questions surrounding game space in Age of Mythology should be 1. Does the game space make the player feel like they are in the ancient world? And 2. Does the game space improve gameplay? This, of course, is in some ways left up for debate. These questions also differ in looking at the single-player campaign versus the multiplayer game space. While the game space for multiplayer and random map in terms of the levels is certainly functional in terms of balance and playability, these levels do not offer much for the player in terms of historical representation, neither accurate nor authentic. While the Egyptian and Norse maps do a better job, the Greek maps leave a lot to be desired, with the possible exception of the map Erebus. The map Mediterranean, for example, offers little more than a generic land map surrounded by a central body of water. Any sense of the Mediterranean, either historic or mythic, is lost here. That said, the gameplay throughout the campaign does a much better job of achieving some level of historic and mythic authenticity. Throughout the levels corresponding to the Trojan War, the maps do a good job simulating both the intensity of the war as well as the scope of the war as being fought throughout the countryside and territory rather than only before the gates of Troy. More on this later. The journey that Arkantos must make through the underworld is equally successful. Again, the Egyptian and Norse levels are especially successful with this. Perhaps this is due to their ability to use desert and snowy landscapes in the levels in addition to their incorporation of mythic elements, spaces, figures, and creatures. These campaign maps likewise usually do not disappoint when it comes to negative possibility space, rewarding players who fully explore and investigate every path and cavern. In terms of the player HUD, we will show how Ensemble handles this aspect of game space when we go into the game shortly. Ultimately, as we'll see with all of the games that we'll look at, we need to be asking how well the developers utilize game space in simulating the historical past. Are they following the rules of history, or are they following the rules of the game? And do these necessarily have to be at odds? Turning now to gameplay. I'll take you through a quick game to show you the features and the general flow of a standard game outside of the campaign. Given the focus of this week, I will be highlighting the Greek civilization rather than the Norse or the Egyptian factions. Age of Mythology is like most real-time strategy games. I start with 3 villagers and a scout. My villagers can gather resources as well as build a number of initial buildings, including houses, granaries, storehouses, docks, walls, and temples. We'll start by building a temple. While those 2 villagers work on that, I'll have the third build a granary, and I will also queue more villagers to build out of my town center. The granary that I build is used to drop off food so that my villagers will not have to carry the food gathered from these berries all the way back to the town center. Next, I will send my scout around the map to explore. As you can see from my mini-map, most of the map is currently black because I have not explored there. You will see that after I leave an area, the map is covered by a fog. This is a feature in many strategy games known as Fog of War, a game mechanic that we'll be discussing next week. You can also see that I have a wide range of advanced options as well for my soldiers, allowing them to patrol, fight more defensively, or assemble into specific formations. The temple is important for a few reasons. It not only allows me to build mythic units and research special technologies, but it also allows me to build heroes out of my town center. It is also the one building that I'm required to construct before I'm able to advance to the second age, the Classical Age. Each age has a different hero that I can build out of the town center. Currently, I can build Jason. You'll notice on the side that there are 4 different resources that players have to gather in Age of Mythology: food, wood, gold, and favor. You also have a population limit that can be increased by constructing additional houses or town centers. Food is gathered from berries, farms, fish, and animals, wood is taken from trees, gold is earned from mining or from trading, and favor is earned by having villagers worship at the temple. As my scout begins to uncover more of the map, he finds pigs that can be harvested and reveals the location of additional settlements where more town centers can be constructed. As far as different player interfaces in the game, players have access to a technology tree for their civilization, a breakdown of diplomacy and civilizations. Note that the Greek computer players are assigned historic Greek cities such as Eretria, Knossos, and Troy, the option to tribute resources to your allies, and a chat menu. It is important that I continue to make villagers so that I can build a stronger economy. Again, houses increase your maximum population room, allowing more units to be created. Building the storehouse, much like the granary, will allow my villagers to drop off gold or wood here rather than have to walk back to the town center. I will also build a Pegasus myth unit for my temple, which costs me food and favor. The Pegasus will allow me to explore the map like a scout, but since it flies, it can also explore water and fly over forests and enemy buildings. In addition to serving as drop sites, the granary and storehouse also lets players research different economic upgrades, allowing for faster collection rates from different sources. I will now build my Archaic Age unit, Jason. Heroes not only are good soldiers, especially potent against enemy myth units, but they are also able to pick up relics that are scattered around the map and offer unique bonuses. I'll keep scouting around the map with my scout and my Pegasus so that hopefully I can find more relics. My villagers have begun to harvest some of these pigs and are also getting food from this ox. I need to get to 400 food before I can advance to the next age. At the top of my screen, you will also notice that it says what my current age is. For now, I'm in the Archaic Age. Below this, though, there are 4 slots for my 4 god powers. Since I am playing Zeus, my first power is Bolt, which allows me to kill any single unit. You only get to use each god power one time. The enemy unit's Hippocampus looks like a good target. Back at my base, I have most of my villagers gathering food so that I can age up soon. Now that I have 400 food, I click to age up, and I have to decide which minor god I want to worship. Based on this decision, I will have access to certain myth units, god powers, and special technologies. In this case, worshipping Athena lets me build Minotaurs, use the Restoration god power, and research technologies that make my infantry stronger and upgrade my Minotaurs. Conversely, Hermes would give me the Ceasefire god power, allow me to build Centaurs, and offer technologies that would help my cavalry and my Centaurs. You will see a few god powers in action in this playthrough, but we will talk about what all of them do later in the lecture. Now that my next age is researching, I will begin to move my economy towards a more equal gathering of food, wood, and gold. I will send villagers north to gather from these berries, and I will put the next few villagers that I build on wood and gold. Upon aging up, I immediately get a Minotaur, and I gain access to a number of new units and technologies. In addition to what I get from aging up with Athena, I can now build my classical age hero, Odysseus, from the town center. I can likewise research additional technologies from my economic buildings. I have finally spotted a relic near the bottom of the map. I can send Jason to pick it up and garrison it inside my temple to gain its benefits. In this case, the relic makes my siege units cheaper to build. The Classical Age also allows my villagers to construct additional buildings, including armories, farms, watchtowers, barracks, archery ranges, and stables. I will first build an armory, as this is the required building needed to advance to the Third Age, the Heroic Age. I already happen to have the 800 food and the 500 gold needed to advance. Meanwhile, it looks like I have scouted where the green player is located on the map. As my armory builds, I begin to shift more villagers onto gold, so that once I hit the Third Age, I can begin constructing military units. Once again, upon clicking to age up, I need to choose which god to worship, this time either Dionysus or Apollo. While Dionysus will help my cavalry, allow me to build Hydras and Scylla, and give me the bronze god power, Apollo will help my archers, allow me to use the underworld god power, and give me mana cores. I ultimately decide to go with Dionysus and the fearsome Hydra. In addition to allowing players to advance to the Third Age, the armory also has technologies that increase your human soldiers' attack and defense. You can also see 2 additional technologies below that we got from worshipping Athena. To the north, we scouted the teal player, but unfortunately their town center killed my scout. Since I am now able to construct farms, which provide an unlimited amount of food, I bring my villagers back to my town center where they can be better protected. Advancing to the Third Age, I'm greeted by a mighty Hydra. Since I will begin building more villagers and units, I put up additional houses to increase my population size, and I begin putting down farms for my villagers. In order to further increase my economy, as well as my maximum population, it is time to put up more town centers. These can only be built on pre-existing settlements, so I send my villagers north. While this is building, I also put up barracks, a stable, and an archery range, so that I can begin building an army. In anticipation, I also upgrade my unit's attack at the armory. Our economy is going strong, but we're still a ways from advancing to the final age, which requires 1,000 food, 1,000 gold, and a market. As my military buildings finish constructing, I'm able to see what types of units I can produce. Fairly intuitively, I'm able to build range units from the archery range, Toxotes and Peltists, as well as upgrades that make them stronger and produce faster. From the stable, I can build cavalry units, Hippocons and Progemos, as well as their corresponding upgrades, including the special technology we got from worshipping Dionysus. And at the barracks, we can build and upgrade infantry, both hoplite spearmen and hypaspis swordsmen. We will build some from each building so that we can have a balanced army. We can upgrade our sentry towers to watchtowers as well so that they can fire upon enemy units. We can see our military units starting to come out. I need to get more food and gold so I can age up, so I send villagers north to mine gold and to build a market. In the south, more farms are added, and I admire my small army. In Age of Mythology, cavalry are generally good against archers, archers good against infantry, and infantry good against cavalry. Unit triangles such as this are a common feature in the RTS genre. We expand further by putting up another settlement in the south and continue to build up our own economy. This Green Scout made a mistake coming here. For the moment, our villagers have stopped producing because we have reached our population limit. We will need more houses to sustain them. In the north, our market serves three main purposes. It allows us to age up to the Mythic Age once we have the resources, it allows us to buy and sell resources, and it allows us to start trading with one of our town centers to generate gold. We also have to be careful to make sure that none of our villagers are standing around idle. Lazy villagers make for bad economies. Finally, we have enough food and gold to age up for the last time. As before, we will have to choose between Hera and Hephaestus, both offering hard-hitting myth units and god powers. Since we are playing as Zeus, we will decide on Hera so that she is not angry with us. Our economy begins to reach full bloom as we slowly age up. Since Green had the nerve to send his scout into our base, we will make an example of him. Each age brings more technologies from nearly all of my buildings. For instance, with my watchtowers, I can now upgrade them to guard towers, allow them to more easily hit moving targets, or remove their minimum range. We can also begin upgrading some of our soldiers in preparation for our assault on Green's base. It seems as though Red has also tasted the fury of Zeus. Since we worshipped Hera, Medusa comes to join our ranks. I've also decided to make infantry the core of my army, since they will benefit from our Athena upgrades. In order to get them into tip-top shape, I begin ordering upgrades from the armory, including our Athena techs, and I continue to upgrade them at the barracks. This is a task that will require more than a single barracks. While my military is upgrading, I make sure that I have researched all of my economic technologies as well, allowing my villagers to gather quickly and efficiently. We will also call out Bellerophon, our 4th Age hero from the town center. Since we are attacking Green's base, it might also be a good idea to bring some siege equipment to deal with any towers as well as the enemy town center. For Greeks, siege weapons are built out of the fortress, a powerful defensive structure. Another building that players are able to build upon reaching the Mythic Age is the Wonder. While very expensive to construct, after a player has built a Wonder, if they can defend it for 10 minutes, they automatically win the game. Our army is beginning to look strong, now joined by Bellerophon, a very strong hero. Once we finish our final upgrade to Champion Hoplites, we will just have to wait for our siege equipment before marching on to green. We can further strengthen our army by bringing along some additional myth units and by researching some powerful technologies from the temple. Finally, our fortress has finished building, so we can add some siege equipment to our forces. As an RTS, Age Mythology is all about balance and multitasking, so even as I build up my army, I can't lose sight of my economy or my population space. Hydras and siege towers will be the perfect units to round out the army. Our last siege tower is finally built, thanks to the villager who sacrificed his life to free up the necessary population space. With some final armory upgrades queued, we can begin our march. You will also notice that we have begun trading from our market, so every time one of our donkey caravans runs back and forth, he generates 87 gold. Our army slowly winds its way up the coast. Little does Green know that his doom approaches. I also choose to bring along some villagers with the army so that they can build town centers on their settlement sites. They may also be useful if I need to repair my siege equipment. It will also soon be time to use our god powers. Restoration heals all my units in an area for a brief period of time. Bronze covers all of my human units in bronze armor, raising their defense for a minute or so, and Lightning Storm does a great amount of damage to all enemy units within the target area. When used together, god powers can often combine to great effect. Some of Green's defenseless villagers are the first to run into my army. Before too long, however, I am pushing into Green's main base. I cover my troops with bronze and then activate the Lightning Storm to kill off Green's army. What damage my units have suffered is quickly healed with the restoration power. Even with my lazy catapults, it's not long before Green's base begins to crumble. As his town center fails, Troy asks that I humbly accept his surrender, which I do. From the ashes of his once great city, I build my own town center, claiming this conquered land as my own. From here I can continue to upgrade my units and buildings before moving on to also destroy Teal and Red. This hopefully not too tedious gameplay of Age Mythology should give you a relatively good idea of the features and functions of the game. The final aspect of Age Mythology that we will look at is the game's content detail. While there are dozens of different aspects that we might focus on, I specifically want to look at the range of god powers, myth units, and technologies, the incorporation of Greek heroes, and the types of units that players can build. The best way to break down these various gods, powers, units, and technologies is to look at the technology tree that comes with the game. When Age of Mythology came out in 2002, it actually came with a paper version of these trees for all of the gods and civilizations. Luckily, I happen to still have mine from 16 years ago, so I scanned it and put a copy into the Elms folder for this week. I've included the skill trees for the Norse and Egyptian civilizations as well as the Greeks for anyone interested. The question to ask ourselves as we look through these trees is, why did the game designers decide to attribute these powers, myth units, and technologies to these different gods? Was it an attempt to allude to some account or story from Greek mythology, or was it simply an effort to keep the game balanced and enjoyable? Surprisingly, there is actually quite a bit that can be drawn out from the selection of these factors. Looking at the gods themselves, players can choose from one of three main gods: Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades. This makes sense as these were the three main gods, brothers who, led by Zeus, ultimately overthrew Kronos and the Titans to become the ruling deities. After their victory, the world was divided up between them, Zeus getting the skies, Poseidon the seas, and Hades the earth, including the underworld. In choosing one of these three gods, players also receive unique abilities. Players who choose Zeus start with favor, gain favor faster, and max out at 200 favor rather than the usual 100. Also, hoplites move faster, and all infantry do more damage to buildings. His god power is Bolt, which kills a single unit, and his special technology, Olympic Parentage, increases hero hit points. Next, Poseidon players get cheaper markets and cavalry, faster fishing ships and caravans, and militia units that spawn when their buildings get destroyed. His god power is Lure, which attracts animals to a stone, and his technology, Lord of Horses, increases cavalry line of sight. Finally, players who choose Hades get increased hit points on their buildings, increased attack on their buildings and archers, and dead shade soldiers that appear at the temple when units die. Players start with a Pegasus regardless of which god they decide. Let's start with what works well. The fact that Zeus gets bonuses to favor makes sense as he is the king of the gods. His god power seems obvious, and the technology, Olympic Parentage, fits as well given the fact that Zeus and his promiscuity fathered a majority of the demigods and heroes of Greek mythology. Some of Poseidon's bonuses also work well. Poseidon was the god of horses in addition to water and earthquakes. Thus the decision to give these players bonuses on fishing ships and cavalry makes sense, as does the technology, Lord of Horses. Hades' technology, Vault of Erebus, likewise works well. Erebus was the name for the underworld, and as the god of the earth, Hades also controlled everything within it, including gold and other precious metals. His ability to generate shades at player temples is also fitting. Despite these strong illusions, there are many decisions behind the bonuses attributed to these starting gods that seem to have been made strictly out of need for balance. While the decision to give Poseidon bonus to cavalry, the subsequent decision to give Zeus infantry and Hades archers makes sense from a game design perspective, but is arbitrary in terms of Greek mythology. Likewise, Hades' bonuses to buildings can perhaps be attributed to his ownership of the ground, hence ensuring strong foundations, but this seems to be a stretch. The god powers given to Hades and Poseidon also seem irrelevant as well. Perhaps if the sentinel power protected the town center with a three-headed dog rather than stone archers, it would work. After choosing their primary Greek god, players are also forced to choose from a pair of minor gods with each age up. This choice, however, is already narrowed down based on your starting god, as one of the three possibilities is thrown out depending on who you are. For example, Athena, Hermes, and Ares are all classical gods, but Zeus players can only choose between Athena and Hermes, Poseidon players can only choose between Ares and Hermes, and Hades players can only choose between Ares or Athena. This places further emphasis on your starting god. The decision to place certain minor gods under Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades is quite interesting, and leads us once again to wonder if the designers are trying to allude to the mythic past, or if these decisions are simply arbitrary. For instance, the gods available under Zeus all have clear connections with him. Athena was born from his forehead, Hermes was his son with Maia, Apollo his son with Leda, Dionysus, as we read, his son with Semele, Hephaestus his son with Hera, and then Hera herself his wife. Uniquely, Hera is only obtainable through playing as Zeus, as she is not available to either Poseidon or Hades. Despite the clear connections between Zeus and these gods, we have to ask ourselves if this was a clever design or just random chance. After all, of the three gods not available to Zeus, Ares, Aphrodite, and Artemis, both Ares and Artemis are also children of Zeus. Again, we have to wonder if this isn't more about balance and the rules of the game than the rules of history. We might point to clever game design in the decision to keep both Ares and Aphrodite always together under Poseidon and Hades, given their ongoing romantic affair, but then we also have to ask ourselves why the twins Artemis and Apollo are not kept together in the same way. The decision to have both Apollo and Artemis under Hades no doubt reflects the focus on Hades as benefiting archers, as do Apollo and Artemis. Indeed, the very decision to make certain gods belong to certain ages is questionable in places as well. Given the game's focus on war, we would expect gods like Ares and Athena to be higher up, but they are only in the classical age. Again, not placing the twins Apollo and Artemis on the same level also seems strange. Ultimately, while it works very well for the game, the basis of having Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades as the gods of the Archaic Age is troubling, as the most powerful Greek gods have the weakest god powers. The decision to tie certain myth units to these minor gods likewise causes some confusion. The only connection between Athena and the Minotaur is that the creature ate sacrificial Athenian citizens, and that the Prince of Athens, Theseus, was the one who ultimately killed him. Similarly, while centaurs can be tied to Apollo and Hera, there is no connection with Hermes. There is likewise no connection between the Cyclops and Ares. While it is good that Ares is a possibility for Poseidon players, as some of the Cyclops are sons of Poseidon, it is strange that the Minotaur is not also available to Poseidon, as it is ultimately his curse on Pasiphae that causes the creation of the Minotaur in the first place. The designer's decision to exclude centaurs from the Hades player is also interesting given the god's focus on archers and range units. In the Heroic Age, manticores have no connection with Apollo, other than that it is a ranged myth unit, and indeed it isn't even a Greek mythological creature. Dionysus likewise has no connection to Hydra or Scylla. Hades is the only real god who has a connection, as the Hydra guarded one of the entrances to the underworld, and yet the Hydra is excluded from Hades' tree. Similarly, the Nemean lion has no connection with Aphrodite, while its connection with Zeus is ignored by excluding it from his tech tree. In the Mythic Age, Chimera likewise has no attachment to Artemis. Neither does Medusa with Hera, as it is Athena who is connected with the Gorgon both in her creation and in her death. The Karkanos, at least, refers to the giant crab that Hera summoned to attack Hercules during his fight with the Hydra. Likewise, Hephaestus' myth unit also makes sense. According to legend, it was Hephaestus who built Talos, the great Colossus automaton, to guard Europa while she lived in Crete. Connections between these gods and their god powers are just as flimsy. Restoration and Pestilence are only loosely related to Athena and Ares, and Ceasefire only really applies to Hermes, as he is usually the one to announce the will of Zeus or the gods, and sometimes this includes preventing further fighting. Underworld Passage has no connection with Apollo, and Bronze only fits with Dionysus if it is linked to the drunken rage that he can send people into, although we would expect an increase to unit attack, not defense, if this were the case. Curse seems like a more fitting god power for Aphrodite, although there is no specific instance of this in the myth. Earthquake does not fit Artemis at all, and Lightning Storm only fits Hera as she is the wife of Zeus. It seems a shame not to give her her own god power. Finally, Hephaestus' plenty god power makes some sense given the amount of precious metals, notably silver and gold, that he uses to forge weapons and treasures. The unique technologies associated with these gods tend to do a better job at drawing connections either to the god or goddess, or to the corresponding myth unit. Aegis' shield refers to Athena's shield with the head of Medusa placed on the front. The Labyrinth of Minos refers to the famous maze created by Daedalus that housed Minos' Minotaur in Crete. Conversely, Sarissa is perhaps not the best name for the technology, as the Sarissa was actually a spear developed and utilized by Philip and the Macedonians rather than by the classical Greeks. Spear of Panic, Sword of Dread, and Bow of Horror all relate to the terror and violence that Ares caused during wars, although these are fairly loose connections. Will of Kronos connects back to the fact that the Cyclops were brothers to Kronos and the Titans, and likewise prison mates in Tartarus. For Hermes, Sylvan lore alludes to the fact that the centaurs were known as rustic creatures of the forest, while Spirited Charge and Winged Messenger refer to Hermes' status as the messenger god who was renowned for his speed and athletic ability. The god Apollo wore many hats in Greek mythology, including being the god of the sun, the god of prophecy, the patron of the Oracle of Delphi, and the god of music. These technologies all relate to this. Sunray, specifically referring to Apollo's bow crafted by Hephaestus that shot sun rays as arrows. While Anastrophe has nothing to do with Dionysus, Bacchanalia refers to the Roman religious festival held in Dionysus' honor, and Thracian horses refer to the fact, as we saw in the Bacchae, that Dionysus was first worshipped in Thrace. Aphrodite's technologies are also well designed. Roar of Orthus refers to Orthus, the two-headed dog, who fathered the Nemean lion with the monster Echidna. Golden Apples refers to the fact that Aphrodite was awarded with a golden apple by Paris over Athena and Hera as she promised him the love of Helen, the event that sparked the Trojan War. And Divine Blood refers to Aphrodite's birth, as she was ultimately born from the blood of the Titan Uranus after his son Kronos sliced off his manhood. As we already mentioned with Hephaestus, his technologies make sense as they refer to Talos or to his work as the god of the forge. Hera's technology, Monstrous Rage, alludes to how she could force people into uncontrollable rages as she did with Hercules. Face of the Gorgon refers to the famous fact that Medusa's face would turn anyone who looked at her into stone. That said, Athenian Wall has no connection with Hera, nor does Triarch fit with Artemis. Shafts of Plague, however, does fit with her ability to send down plague and pestilence upon people or cities, as could her twin brother Apollo. Finally, Flames of Typhon refers to the fact that the Chimera was fathered by the giant Typhon and the monster Echidna. Such comparisons and connections could be made as well for what specific hero is given to the Greeks for each age based upon their major god. The historical accuracy of the types of units available to players could likewise be explored. We will leave the discussion here though, only making one final note. Regardless of the names and types of Greek units in Age of Mythology, it is clear that the game designers wanted players to run infantry, cavalry, and archers in equal numbers, or at least believe that each unit in this triangle was equally viable. While such balance is great for the playability of the game, it does not accurately reflect what typical army compositions looked like in Greece, or indeed throughout the ancient world. For the ancient Greeks, the hoplite heavy infantry composed the backbone of the army, while cavalry and archers represented a clear minority. For example, when Pericles catalogues the Athenian forces at the beginning of the Peloponnesian War in 431 BCE, he reports 15,000 frontline hoplites, 1,600 reserve hoplites, 1,600 cavalry, 1,200 archers, and 300 warships. Since real-time strategy games typically feature a combat between individual units rather than full armies, some of the authenticity of classical Greek warfare is lost. That said, the chaos and individual fighting that often represents much of RTS combat may allow players to better appreciate combat before the classical era, for instance as the Trojan Wars described in Homer's Iliad. With all four aspects of Age mythology thoroughly explored, we will end this lecture with a few points of comparison between the game and the historical past. It is clear that the works of Homer served as an important influence for the game developers. The main story arc of the Greek third of the game is focused on the final days of the Trojan War, and the game generally does a good job capturing the back and forth feel of the war, with the Greeks gaining the upper hand one day and the Trojans the next.
Send word to Ajax. The gate is down. We must move.
Sir, the Trojans are attacking the camp. Ajax is surrounded.
What? Odysseus, we must rescue them.
Such back and forth stays true to Homer's epic. As we mentioned above, the level design and the game space also works well for these maps, as the walls of Troy always seem to loom just out of reach. Despite these strengths, the entire conflict does seem one-sided. All of the great heroes and princes of Troy, which form a counterweight to the Greek heroes in Homer's epic, are completely absent from Age of Mythology. There is no Hector, Paris, or Aeneas to fight against the Greeks. The same is true for the strange lack of godly interest in the war in Age of Mythology. And even on the Greek side, important heroes like Menelaus, Nestor, and most importantly Achilles are absent from the campaign. This last absence is even more striking given the decision to include the followers of Achilles, the Myrmidons, as a unit in the game. Arkantos then seems to have taken the place of Achilles in the narrative. the great warrior who leads the Greeks to victory. And yet it is clear that Arkantos also takes on many of the actions and characteristics of Odysseus. It is Arkantos, not Odysseus, who comes up with the plan for the Trojan horse. And after the war, Arkantos' journey takes him on a very similar odyssey. Like Odysseus, Arkantos' only desire is to return home to his son.
Where to now, Arkantos?
Back to Atlantis. This was a welcome break from chasing pirates, but I need to return home.
But also like Odysseus, it will take him many miles to distant shores before he is finally able to do so. Both are likewise protected by the goddess Athena. Thus, with many clear nods to Homer's Odyssey, we find Arkantos traveling through the underworld, and even finding himself on Circe's island, turned into a pig. Clever nods such as these to the mythic tradition can be found throughout the game, whether it is discovering the Argo in the underworld, or finding yourself in Polyphemus' cave. And the best part is that many of these nods are left for the players to find on their own, negative possibility space at its finest. Ultimately, like Odysseus, Arkantos comes home to find his house in a state of upheaval. Odysseus' conflict with the suitors is nicely acknowledged by making Odysseus an archer, likewise alluding to his association with the bow of Hercules. Another interesting decision by the game developers was choosing to make Arkantos from the city of Atlantis. Despite the continued emphasis on Atlantis in video games and movies, and even concerted efforts by 20th century archaeologists in locations like Santorini, the existence of the city of Atlantis flies in the face of mythological as well as historical record. We have no evidence that even the ancient Greeks believed in such a mythic city. Rather, the city of Atlantis was created by the philosopher Plato in his works Timaeus and Critias. And Plato's Atlantis was not a glorious past civilization, but actually an allegory designed to warn his fellow Athenians against the dangers of democratically run sea powers, such as Athens herself. In the story of Atlantis, all of the city's allies rise up against her, and the gods eventually sink the city to the depths of the ocean as punishment for its pride and hubris. While the developers of Age Mythology are of course free to spin the story however they choose, mythological integrity would perhaps have seen them at least acknowledging this fact. Perhaps a nod at the end of the game along the lines of, "Nobody's even going to believe that Atlantis ever existed." It is historical questions such as this, both in terms of general authenticity as well as detailed accuracy, that we have to take into account as we evaluate these games as historiography. Based on everything we discussed in this lecture, I will leave you with a few questions to ponder as you write your discussion post later this week. First, at its core, all Greek myth was didactic in purpose, whether on the stage or in the epic. Does Age Mythology utilize myth in the same way? If so, what is it trying to teach its players? Second, does the presentation of gods in Age of Mythology fit your understanding of the Greek gods? Do you think the game's presentation was in any way shaped by our modern notions of the divine? Third, given what we have said about Age Mythology, do you think the game offers an authentic portrayal of mythology? Why or why not? And finally, do you think the game strikes a good balance between accuracy and gameplay? Do you think that mixing intentional illusions with arbitrary units, powers, and technologies can be harmful? That's all for this lecture. Thanks for listening. I know it ran a little long. In our final lecture for this week, we'll be briefly looking over our assigned readings. See you then.